Good morning, everybody, and welcome to City of London. Welcome to Guildhall as well. I think it's an appropriate venue to have this particular session today. I suppose before I get into my slides, make sure I figure out how these work, and they do. Good. Bit of a context setting, shall we? Why am I speaking to you here today as the City of London Police Commissioner? We police a square mile, just the financial sector within London. The wider London is a metropolitan police, but the key reason I'm speaking to you today is we lead the country with a lead police force for economic crime and fraud. And within that work, we have three main pillars of our business. We host the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, so the one national centre for gathering intelligence and crime reporting on all types of fraud, whatever it is, and we have a lot of data sets coming in from industry as well. We feed that into the National Crime Agency, and I'll explain what that is in a second. We then have our own fraud investigation teams that investigate the very top level fraud, separate to the Serious Fraud Office, but very similar to that. But we investigate a broader range of fraud and criminality, from insider trading through to bribery, through to share fraud and everything you can think of, frankly. And we have about 300 to 500 cases on the go at any one time. They're big cases, they often take many years, some of those. They're big, long, complex cases. And then most importantly and relevant today with what we're doing in terms of the British standards is we have our own academy and training. And increasingly what we've been doing over the years is understanding that actually if our core mission is to prevent fraud and to make a reduction of economic crime, we have to do more in training people. And 50% of the training courses we now provide are to the private sector, not just to policing. And that has to be the way forward for us as well. Bit of context, I will come into bribery and corruption as well, but what's going on across government at the moment, you may or may not know, but we have a national crime agency that's in shadow form at the moment, brought in by the current government. It will go live in October this year, and within that there are 4 commands. One of those commands is an economic crime command. So for the very first time, at a national level, looking at all types of organised crime, we're going to have economic crime as a key priority set by this government. Part of that role within the Economic Crime Command is to bring together a host of other agencies. So the Serious Fraud Office, what we do, the existing Serious and Organised Crime Agency, the Office of Fair Trading, Revenue and Customs, and so on. That will make a big difference to how the government moves forward in a whole range of types of criminality. One of the big challenges is how we get reporting right, both from industry in other types of fraud, which we've almost got to industrialise because of the nature of cyber threat and fraud at the moment, and how we actually get reporting right for this particular discussion today, which is about bribery and corruption. So that's sort of a bit of a context setting for you. How bad is corruption? I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that question, frankly. What we do know through many different parts of research, and it doesn't matter what you look like on the internet, that some would say up to 50% of businesses worldwide have some experience of or subject to corruption. It's that big. And I think that's true, which is why a number of countries, Britain, Australia, Canada, have put in place domestic legislation to try and make a difference. And why is that? They don't want to prosecute businesses. They actually want to free up a freer and open society and make business better worldwide for better growth. That is the reason for this legislation. That is the reason we are not about trying to prosecute lots of people, which is why we are here today to celebrate British standards, because it's all about trying to get businesses to understand what they need to do to actually make a difference worldwide. If you look at some of the Transparency International survey work which has gone on globally, and I think we may have someone here today from Transparency International, it would suggest from the public, talking to people, talking to businesses, that the perception is bribery and corruption is still there. It's significant. One of the big challenges for us that we take from this sort of research, which we know already, is how do we get reporting right? Who does someone report to? Where? What do people do within the business place? And that is something we're having active discussions about. There's a reporting hotline through the Serious Fraud Office. We have a call centre, a website for the country called Action Fraud that funnels everything into us and through into government, but actually the public aren't aware of this yet. We've got to do more publication about this manner of reporting fraud and economic crime. It is an unclear picture, where to report it. Somebody, and when I've done some media interviews earlier today, there are always questions, well, how many bribery and corruption cases are there on the go? Well, the Bribery Act is only one act, of course, and there are many other acts that are to do with corruption and fraud, malfeasance in the public office, the Fraud Act, and we have many investigations, so do other agencies. So it's a very hard question to answer. We are not about trying to seek to actually drive into businesses to find criminal offences. You know, this is the big shift, isn't it? I suppose it's an important thing to do is counterintuitive legislation. The legislation is brought in to try and encourage businesses to work differently. So my sort of big message today is we are not hunting down every individual in a company trying to find a prosecutable offence. We will take reports, we have to triage them anyway because we have so much fraud to deal with, and we will follow investigations into what are very serious and obvious bribery acts taking place. You know, and you'll be concerned as businesses, well, what does the legislation mean in terms of my hospitality and expenses and how we do business? You know, you've got to step way over that line, and individuals know their way over that line, and corporates will know their way over that line before we and prosecuting bodies will look to start prosecuting people. We're not into that grey area of is it or isn't it. You know, that is why the legislation actually says to you, you know, it needs to be a number of factors that show a crime has started to be committed. There are links to organised crime, bribery and corruption, it's obvious, and that's why we're interested in following it up. We have a very established network now of what organised criminality looks like worldwide. In economic crime, it is worldwide. We're often being targeted from foreign countries, and you will see organised crime groups getting involved in some of that bribery and corruption, but often it's localised in countries as well. You can read that as I go here. We've got a lead role, as I said, for economic crime generally. We do have a dedicated unit within our force, which is called the Overseas Anti-Corruption Unit, and Sanjo's the lead is sitting here as well. That unit is funded by government. It specifically looks at some of our developing countries, so it has a narrower remit because of what its role is. We have a broader remit, and the Serious Fraud Office clearly have a remit as well in this area. So there are many bodies looking at bribery and corruption. We are working more increasingly with other countries. We've just set up a task force across America, Australia, Canada and us. It's a policing task force about how we share our investigative asset. You know, if we can conduct investigations in host countries on behalf of other countries, it makes life a lot easier for us. But the message is clear, I think. There is an increasing focus on economic crime and bribery and corruption across a number of countries at the moment, represented through government policy, through domestic legislation and policing activity, and that won't go away, and it's because it's not just bribery and corruption, it's actually economic crime and fraud and cyber, and it is a growing threat to most countries in the Western world at the moment. Why do we want to get involved in British standards? Why have we been involved in it? Because actually our core role is to prevent crime. That is what policing stands for, which is why in other crime types the enforcement of prosecution offences is only one asset where we look desperately to try and find how do we minimise and stop this happening in the first place. It seemed to us, and it's obvious to us, ever since the legislation came in, that companies have been grappling and struggling sometimes to get training to something that's clunky. Legislation is clunky, isn't it? That's why the British Standards just seems a perfect way, because the British Standards is an easy to understand set of rules and compliance rules that you can put in place in a business. It's perfect for us. That means crime prevention to us. We want to endorse it. We've worked with the British Institute to actually introduce the standards, and now we are celebrating the fact that we want to do part of that training as well, because it's part of our core mission for you. So today's training, British Standards, would hopefully offer, for businesses, one place you can go to get a very clear governance structure in place in your organisation. Now, it doesn't mean to say you haven't got many companies providing training, and many of those are good training. But our feedback has been that when businesses reach out, they're not sure where to go to or whether or not the training is the right training. And of course, that training will look very different because it's provided by different providers. That actually goes away once you put training against a very solid thing like a British Standard. And that's basically what today is all about and why we're celebrating that as well. I won't state this, it's obvious, isn't it? You know the advantages of this in terms of legal compliance. There are business advantages to this in terms of your own costs, in terms of business as well. I wasn't sure aware of the insurance premiums, that was a new one to me until I saw my own slides earlier. But you're probably very aware of that as well. We have a fraud academy, and part of it today as well, just to re-emphasise that. We are going global on our training into other parts of the world. We provide training to a lot of the investigative services. We provide training to the Financial Conduct Authority, the Serious Fraud Office, police forces on fraud, investigation, cyber. But we are increasingly opening up our own fraud training market to the private sector, because we see that a way of you benefiting, us benefiting, and actually achieving our core mission as well.